Now that everyone is back to being separated, episode 6 of The Acolyte has returned to the two-part title format with Teach and Corrupt. But on top of May and Osha's perspective, we're also starting to get more from Vernestra, and we'll talk about her last, I think. We'll start with the one that I think is probably the weakest of the episode, with May and Sol on the ship. This is leading to what is probably going to be one of the more interesting parts of the series, with Sol finally telling May what happened on Brenock in episode 7. But for me at least, the episode played a bit too much with the same thing of, oh, Sol is almost getting through on the comms. I think overall the show has actually been really good at dispensing with mysteries that aren't actually going to be that mysterious for the audience. In the first 2 episodes I talked about, for example, how I was happy the show didn't drag out the idea that Osha had killed Torben. And I think you can even say the same thing with Qimir, where most of the audience had figured out that Qimir was going to be the Sith, or at least the person talking about being a Sith. We'll get to that in a minute. And I've also talked about how this is something that Phase 2 of the High Republic I think did really well too, when there was a kind of murder mystery going on, and I was afraid they were going to go down the path of the audience knowing that one of these core theories of what happened was wrong, and just playing it out with the characters. But I think we are going a little bit too far with the number of times Sol is on the verge of telling May or Osha everything, and we just don't quite get to it. Sol and May's plot in the episode is mostly Basil, Pip, and then Sol figuring out that May is not in fact Osha. And while I think there is value in what's going on here, showing May the kind of life that Osha had started to build for herself, seeing Pip and then Sol caring about Osha in a way that she didn't think the Jedi were going to be capable of based on what we're seeing Qimir telling Osha. But while Sol does unintentionally teach May about that relationship that Osha has with Pip, overall, I think May in this episode gets less out of the teaching than Osha gets out of the corrupting. We haven't quite got to the teaching just yet, although Sol is once again promising we're right about to get there. We do once again see Sol's guilt over what happened on Brenock, whatever that was, and whatever May and Osha went through, winning out over his desire to immediately get back to the Jedi. We still don't know what drove Torben to kill himself, and we're starting to see this same almost self-destructive tendency in Sol, where it almost seems like he needs absolution from the girls before he can take this before the Jedi, and that might ultimately be what undoes the Jedi in this situation. His decision to not stick around seems to be what makes Vernestra's assistant Jedi potentially think that Sol is responsible for what Qimir has done. We as the audience obviously know that something bigger is at play for Sol and that all of this hinges on Brenock, but most of the Jedi don't know that Brenock was a thing. Vernestra is the exception there. For Osha's side, Corrupt definitely fits, because Qimir is trying to take these valid things that Osha has felt in her past and twist them into something that isn't necessarily true. We still actually don't know what made Osha leave the Jedi directly. In this episode, she says it's because she failed, but what form did that failure take is still unclear. It probably has something to do with her attachment to her family. That seems to be the common theme, where Osha wasn't able to get over what happened, and that seems to be a lot of what Qimir is able to latch onto and slowly pull Osha towards his way of seeing things. I don't think Osha is necessarily bought into anything Qimir is saying, even though she does put on the mask at the end, but more than anything, Osha, like May, is curious and wants answers to what happened to her. Even when she's the one holding the lightsaber against Qimir, she probably knows that there's not really much she can actually do to Qimir unless he allows it. But we do learn a lot more about Qimir's perspective in this as well. We find out that he was involved in the Jedi Order at some point. Even though he seems quite young, he says it was a long time ago. And the implication at this point seems to be that Vernestra was his master. There's definitely something going on with that. The scars on his body are very Light Whip inspired, and the fact that he has a Shoto would mean that he is expecting to come up against a Light Whip at some point, or fought it in the past. I talked in my prior review about how I was excited to see this matchup coming in live action, but it seems like not only is it coming in live action, it's something that was explicitly prepared for by the person with the Shoto. It's not just there on accident. So that makes me even more excited about this upcoming confrontation that seems to be on its way between Qimir and Vernestra. And I think having Qimir get this kind of backstory really shows why he would go after May and Osha the way he did. He's definitely looking out for just his own ends at the end of the day, But if he was cast out of the Order in some way, then he might see something in Osha that he feels himself. And that need for revenge against the Jedi might be what drew him to May as well. There have been some complaints since the start of the show about the Sith being in hiding and then having May go after these Jedi. But I think in a situation where the Sith do want to do something against the Jedi Order and you need to be able to test your apprentice, that makes May a prime target. If Qimir is aware of what happened on Brenock, then having someone like May go after these Jedi has the upside of you test that person as an apprentice, you get to see what they can do against the Jedi, and the more that the Jedi look into it, the more it's their own failures on Brenock that come up, rather than necessarily thinking, oh, someone's going after the Jedi, maybe this is Sith involvement. On top of that, we also get Qimir explaining his armor, that it is made out of Cortosis, and he has now said that on screen in the show. But more importantly, we see that there is Cortosis on the planet as well. After the first trailers came out, I was very much on the this is possibly Octo train. I thought that the pool that has the mirror cave under it was possibly formed by the defeat of the Sith and the Acolyte. But with the Cortosis and with the planet descriptions, as Eckhart's Ladder I'm sure is going to talk about in his review, because he's been very big on talking about this in the group chat, we're much more likely to be dealing with Baldemnik here, the planet which Darth Plagueis, the novel from Legends, opens on. This is the planet full of Cortosis mines where Darth Plagueis kills his master, Darth Tenebris. But notably, that book also talks about how the galaxy leading up to Palpatine's takeover had been full of various Sith who had been trying to take that mantle for themselves. The galaxy wasn't just empty of Darkside users except for 2 hiding Banite Sith. Plagueis is just particularly proud that he can trace his own lineage back to Darth Bane through that master and apprentice pair system, keeping themselves in hiding. This is important to bring up because it does leave open the option that Qimir is one of these kind of fringe Sith. I do think he is part of that lineage, but much like he was thrown aside by the Jedi, I think we're keeping that theme alive, and he might have been cast aside by his former Sith master. And now he sees Osha as a way to get back at him, not just the Jedi. The way he was talking about May, I kinda got some flashbacks to how Palpatine saw Maul as well. For Palpatine, when he looked at his apprentices, he basically just saw Maul as a short-term weapon, fueled by really single-minded purposes. And Qimir thinks May basically fits into that mold, being solely motivated by revenge, rather than any other wants for herself. In many ways, Osha feels more grounded, but like her turn could be a lot deeper, so I can see what Qimir's going for here. The other question mark, though, is Vernestra. Aside from the possibility of Vernestra being Qimir's Jedi Master, there's been some speculation, which I have taken part in, that Vernestra may have been involved in Qimir's dark side training as well. It's hard to describe anything she's done in this series as being anything other than pretty shady. So I think it's a possibility that Vernestra has taken that role, that she might be part of this Sith infiltrating the Jedi Order. I don't, however, think this is the likely outcome. I think it's more likely with what we see her talking to the Senator about how there might be more scrutiny over the Jedi if it turns out that the Jedi haven't been as forthcoming as they've claimed, that her big sin is going to be taking part in covering this kind of thing up and whatever happened with Qimir in the past. I don't think she'll be out and out Sith or evil in that way. I think we're more likely to get a separate Sith Master. We do know there'll be a second Sith in the series, but I don't think it will be Vernestra. Thanks for watching, though. Hope you're enjoying the series. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments, or I guess yesterday's episode in the comments. We'll be live tonight talking about it more with Ek on Tapcaf Transmissions. Hope to see some of you there.